I'm Jason with Born Handy, and this is part 3 of the pond series. And in this video, I'm looking to increase the carrying capacity of the pond. In my part of the country, we have a really heavy red clay for subsoil. It has just a little bit of chert rock in it for like the naturally occurring stones, but for the most part it is red clay. Now, one of the big benefits to that red clay is that if you dig a pond in this part of the country, you can be pretty confident that your pond is going to hold water, so long as you don't dig so deep and strike something like bedrock or hit some other sort of subsoil down below the clay that allows the water to drain out. But one of the big disadvantages to that clay is that the fish really prefer not to spawn on it if they have a choice. Now, bass and bluegill, if they're in a body of water large enough to sustain them, they are going to spawn during the spawning season regardless of the substrate that you have in that body of water. But if all you have is a clay bottom, they're going to come and dig their bowl-shaped bed, lay their eggs in it, and what will end up happening is a lot of silt will cover some of the eggs that remain in the pond, so you'll have a lower hatch rate. In addition to that, as the fish fans those eggs with oxygenated water, they will inadvertently blow a lot of the eggs out of their bed, and once an egg is lost from the bed, the fish are not going to go and collect those and bring them back. Those eggs are just lost. So what we want to do is provide something that's a little bit more substantial, something that won't blow away with gentle fanning, and something that the fish can, however, still dig their little bowl-shaped nest in. How is this done? Gravel spawning beds. Now, keep in mind that gravel spawning beds are not universally accepted as a best practice. There are arguments on both sides of that say that they are very good for a pond, and just as many arguments that can be made that say they are in fact bad for your pond. I'm going to cover some of the higher points of why people say no and why people say yes, and I'm going to explain why I've decided to go with those gravel beds. The first argument we've kind of already touched on, and that is that these fish are going to spawn no matter what, so what's the point? And that's true, those fish are going to spawn, but as I talked about earlier, we want to increase the productivity of that spawning season. So by having these gravel beds, we can dramatically improve the productivity of the spawning season. And I don't mean by just a little bit. I'm talking about a huge improvement in the overall survival rate of the fish eggs, as well as the fish hatchlings in the fry as they hatch from those eggs. Even people who say they think it's a waste of time generally do acknowledge that the gravel spawning beds will increase the productivity. Their argument just simply becomes, well, if you have too many fish, you actually end up with smaller fish per the population, especially if all you're going to do is throw some fish in there and just say, hey, I'm done, I'm finished with my pond management. You will have higher populations of fish that are much smaller. But that's not what most people do. I think most people who have a recreational pond implement some type of pond management, even if they don't necessarily mean to. I'm trying to build a pond here that'll provide a lot of fun, periodically provide some food. And me and my family, we like to see the wildlife. We want this thing to be a magnet and draw in a lot of the wildlife that we can observe and enjoy. So I want there to be, plenty of water and plenty of fish. So if, a heron wants to patrol the bank, fine by me, go ahead and catch you a handful of fish. Maybe even if I get lucky enough to have an osprey come down and take a fish or two, I don't want to have to worry about, wildlife's impact on the population of my pond. So I would like to increase the number of fish in the pond for those reasons. But I also want this pond to provide as big of bass as I can get it to provide. In other words, I don't want to come in and catch a whole bunch of small, skinny bass. Periodically, I want to catch something pretty big out of this pond. And the best way to do that is to make sure that your apex predator in your pond has plenty to eat. I mentioned I wanted the pond to provide some food and some fun. Bluegill are a fantastic tasting fish. I would like to know that I can go and catch 10 or 15 fish multiple times throughout the year and have a fish fry and not really have a major impact on the overall fish population. The same thing with the bass. I would like to be able to go in there and pull a handful of 2-pound bass out of the pond and know that I've not made a significant dent in the overall population of the fish. You eventually kind of learn the stride and the right amount of fish to pull, and you can eventually end up with even a small pond that can produce big fish with correct management. With all that in mind, I did go ahead and place an order for 10 tons of pea gravel. I got a neighbor down the road who had already offered his assistance with a tractor. The plastic sheeting that I was going to put underneath just didn't cost that much money. The pea gravels themselves were under $600 for the 10 tons. So in my mind, this was a fairly low cost investment for something that could potentially make a huge difference in the overall productivity in the pond. So as far as I was concerned, this was a no-brainer. I got ready, I stretched out some plastic. I'd made myself some little homemade staples to hold this plastic down so the wind didn't blow it away. And then I called in the tractor.
Hey Jason, how are you?
I'm doing good, Mr. Campbell. I've made it back. I'm fixing to start laying out some plastic.
Okay.
So,
well, let me tell you something before you get too busy, Jason. I'm having trouble getting my hose started. I think my fuel filters are frozen.
uh-oh. Well, you have a good one, and do let me know if you get her started, but if not, don't worry about it.
I certainly will, thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, see you.
I need a tractor. This easy job just got a whole lot tougher. So I just rolled up my sleeves and rolled up with a wheelbarrow and got started. Now, this was hard, and this was a lot harder. I knew it was going to be hard. I don't want to say it's harder than I thought it was going to be. That's why I tried to borrow a tractor. What kind of did surprise me about it is that there was no sense of dread. There wasn't like, oh man, this is going to be terrible. I guess it kind of felt more like an investment, more like progress than it did, maybe scraping paint for getting ready to paint a house or something. Even my kids came and got involved. They got a big kick out of the idea that we were going to help the overall health of the pond. Now, this plastic sheet was 20 feet wide and 40 feet long. Down in the pond, it's kind of hard to visualize exactly where full pool is going to be. But based off my best guesses and estimates, I think about 80% of this plastic sheet is going to be just under 3 feet. So maybe 30 inches deep, with the deepest end of it coming around closer to 48 inches or 4 feet. And the shallower end looking at about a foot of water. I hope that that's right. The premium spawning bed is not quite 3 feet deep, which is majority where we're going to be. You want your spawning bed to be deep enough that predators from above, the ospreys that I mentioned, can't run down and grab these spawning fish off their beds. But you also want it to be deep enough that the sunlight reaches through, the water is fairly well oxygenated, and the fish, they know where that sweet spot is, and they tend to like between 2 and 3 feet tends to be their preference. So hopefully we've guessed right in our plastic placement. The job of the plastic is pretty straightforward. Over time, that especially when it's underwater, that clay is going to get really soft and that gravel's heavy. And what I don't want to have happen is for that gravel to gradually sink down into the clay and become unusable for the fish. So the plastic should give us several spawning seasons before we begin to see any diminished use of that gravel. It's not going to stop it entirely. Ponds fill in naturally from the top down. Leaf litter that decays, decaying fish waste, runoff from rainstorms, even just cycles of wind that can stir the pond up and make it become muddy as that mud settles back out. Slowly but surely over time it will begin to bury those pea gravel. But we're talking about something that could be 20, 30 years. I may never have to mess with this again. In addition to the 20 by 40 section that is on top of the plastic, the two mounds of gravel that were dumped left a pretty good footprint itself. We're talking about a 19-foot wide section by 16 feet between the two when I went out and measured. So that 19 by 16 kind of joins up to the plastic sheet, gives me kind of an L-shaped gravel bed, if you will. That area is not on top of the plastic, so we may not get quite as many years, but we do have a lot of gravel bedding there as well. And the fact is, it was a lot harder to move that gravel than you might think. What I was doing is I was accidentally picking up too much clay with it. So I didn't want to move gravel and clay to a new sheet of plastic. So I just decided to let it go. We had some rain moving in the next day, and anytime it rains, the bottom of that pond becomes so muddy, it's hard to work in it. You really almost have to give it a good week of dry weather before you can get down there and walk around. So it just wasn't worth it to me, so we just decided to leave that. Now the majority of that section is going to be around 2 feet deep, up to about a foot deep, just depending on where you stand in it. So between the two, it's about 1,100 square feet of gravel beds for spawning. Now you don't have to use pea gravel. Maybe where you are, there are other things available. For example, crushed brick would have probably worked. I didn't have crushed brick available to me here. Pea gravel was the lowest cost option for something like that, with the exception of crushed limestone. Crushed limestone would probably work in terms of texture and size. The problem is that crushed limestone will also drive the pH of your pond way high, certainly much higher than you want to keep for a recreational pond. Now, if your pond were fed by a natural spring or a stream and you had a constant runoff of water, that may not be quite as much of an issue. But for me, the only source of water that I have is runoff from rain. So limestone was out, so the pea gravel is what we went with. So is this enough? Is this enough pea gravel for the pond? I think any significantly sized area of pea gravel is probably enough. You know, I've heard of people buying these, the big blue kiddie pools that you see at your big box retailers and filling those with pea gravel in ponds in place and working well and having, maybe as many as 4 or 5 beds in one of those 8-foot pools. So certainly this is going to be enough. Yes, I would like to have had more covered, but not having it all covered is not the end of the world. There may even be some advantages to that as well. By having only a portion of it covered, these fish are going to compete for that premium spawning area, leaving the stronger and healthier and better specimens are the ones who are going to have the most productive spawning season versus your other fish. They're going to spawn as well, but they just may not have quite as productive of a spawning season as the fish who managed to win over the gravel beds. Even taking that advantage into consideration, if I had had a tractor available to me, I probably would have ordered probably 20 more tons. I would like to have just had more of it done. But at the end of the day, I'm really happy with the amount of coverage that I got, and I am confident that this is going to be enough to make a huge difference in the overall carrying capacity of the pond. And that was, that was the goal in the beginning. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with what I got, and absolutely, this is more than enough if you're considering doing this for your own pond. Now, there's a lot of other things that I want to do to the pond. A lot of that kind of depends on, my workload and the weather. So if we get a lot of rain, this is probably not going to happen. But if we continue to have some drier weather, I do intend to get some more structures in the shallow end of the pond. You saw the big structures we put in the deep end, and that's great, but I need some things in the shallow water as well. So hopefully the weather will hold just long enough for me to get some shallow structure in the pond, and I will film that and get that as part of an update if we can get it done. But for now, I'm calling the gravel spawning bed a win and complete. And so I am looking forward to seeing the fish use that gravel bed for spawning. If you are enjoying this content, I'm going to ask that you give me a like and a subscribe. Maybe share this content with somebody else who you think might enjoy the content as well. So until next time, this is Jason with Born Handy. Looking forward to seeing you on the next video.